Good afternoon and welcome to the Tuesday, December 7th, 2021 Governing Board Study Session. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 3:01. Because of potential action items, Mr. Sylvan, could you please read our roll?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chair. Catherine Ripley.
Here.
Maria Garcia.
Ms. Garcia?
Here.
Dr. Meredith Hay.
Here.
Luis Gonzalez.
Here.
Damian Klinko.
Here.
All board members are in attendance.
Terrific. The next or first item is our discussion 2.1, developing PCC's first climate action plan. Chancellor Lambert.
Yes, Mr. Chair, good afternoon, everybody. So excited to be able to present to you our climate action plan, as well as the discussion on the second item as well. But I want to put it in a large context and then turn it over to Tom and to Noah. When I was first hired here, I talked about 5 gaps that community colleges needed to close. One of the 5 gaps is the sustainability gap. And the sustainability gap is about the climate components that you're going to hear about today. So this is part of an overall focus of the college and now taking it to another level of intentionality. So with that, Tom, I'll turn it over to you and Noah.
All right, thank you, Chancellor. Let me get my screen shared here. Can you all see that?
We can, yes.
Yes. Okay. Can you see the full screen or is it? There we go. So I'd like to first, say, thank you, Chairman Klinko, board members, Chancellor Lambert, colleagues and guests for providing us the opportunity to go ahead and talk about developing PCC's first climate action plan. I'm here with Dr. Noah Fay, who's the Department Head of Geology and Geography, who is a co-lead, as well as Nick's online. And so hopefully she can also contribute if need be, but right now it's just going to be Noah and myself go ahead and going through these slides. Again, we're going to talk about really kind of the why, the process and ultimate goal that we'll get to you in May of 2022, and that'll be kind of the action plan that we're going to present ultimately. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Noah, who will take us through the first couple of slides, and then I'll finish it up with the last few slides. So Noah.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to start with just acknowledging and applauding the college leadership for taking this on. Individual actions matter in climate change, but it matters a whole lot more through policy. And so we're not talking about policy per se, but I think you know what I mean. By making decisions collectively, we can have much bigger impact than even our own actions added together. So I'm just going to start quickly and talk about where we are in terms of climate science. This is summarized very nicely in the recent, few months ago, the IPCC report of 2021. I'm not going to go through any of the details, but just to point out some changes in language in the report, which are really important, that reflect the confidence that we have in the scientific conclusions about both the causes and the effects of climate change. In 2 words, one is equivocal. There's one of the very first sentences in the report is that human contribution to climate change is unequivocal. There is really no debate about that to be had anymore. And a more general second word I want you to take away is confidence. And I mean that in the most rigorous statistical sense. Each of the scientific conclusions discussed in the IPCC reports has an addendum or a section about the degree of confidence to which we know and can state that conclusion. And there's a really interesting analysis in Time magazine recently about just how much more confidence is being portrayed in this report compared to the last one, which is in 2014. It's almost as if the writers of the report, the scientists here, are really saying, really screaming to the world and policymakers saying, listen, if you're looking for reasons to not act on climate change, uncertainty about the science really can't be one of them. All right, next slide, please. And so as a result of our increased understanding and confidence around climate change, governments large and small, from the scale of federal government to smaller ones, say the Tucson city government, are taking steps similar that we're starting here with climate action plans, both in terms of reducing climate footprint, in terms of greenhouse gas production, but also in terms of climate adaptation and resiliency. So, for example, in the mayor's State of the City address recently, she talked a whole lot about climate resiliency, and the city is in the process of developing a climate action plan related to both the city's carbon footprint and adaptation/resiliency. Interesting factoid, which I learned from that talk, was that Tucson is the third fastest warming city in the US. So think about that in terms of where we are in average temperatures. We're the third fastest warming. That's a quite remarkable fact. So one important sort of side note here is that we, the climate planning team, part of our charge and part of our important task is to coordinate with our community. And that's going to be aligning and coordinating our efforts with, for example, with the city, with Pima County, with U of A and other nonprofit agencies throughout the area. So there's that. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I just want to satisfy the physicist in me and talk a little bit about where do greenhouse gases come from, where, what human activities result in production of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide being the most famous. And this little circular pie chart here shows globally what human activities result in greenhouse gases. In the upper left, the green, the blue, the gray are agriculture, things that result from the action of industry. The biggest one by far, of course, is the red one, which is the consumption of energy. In the upper part of the red circle is energy used for industry to make things. In the lower right-hand corner is energy used to transport people and those things. And in the bottom half is energy used in buildings, heating, cooling, running computers, heating water, that kind of thing. So part of the climate planning team's goal, something that we're starting to work on, is to produce a similar kind of quantified analysis of Pima's carbon footprint. And so I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but I'm quite confident that ours will be dominated by the energy use in buildings part, the heating and cooling of our physical infrastructure, turning on the lights, running computers, that kind of thing. To a much smaller extent, probably transportation, and to some probably smaller extent also related to industry. That is the carbon footprint associated with the stuff that we purchase. All right, next slide. All right, so what we're going to move into now is sort of, well, what do we do about it? How we go about reducing our carbon footprint. And I'm going to talk very generally here and then hand it off back to Tom, and he's going to look at some more specifics of things that Pima can do. And this is just a really nice way, I think, of thinking about behavioral changes that can result in positive climate effects, reducing one's carbon footprint. And this is borrowed from Amherst College. This upside down triangle is organized at the top, the widest part of the triangle, of the things that have the most impact and are the longest lasting. The bottom part of the triangle are the things that have probably the least impact and are short term. So the upper part of the triangle is avoid. The easiest way to not produce carbon is to not do things, is to not turn on the lights, is to not heat an empty classroom, etc. So avoid doing anything, you produce zero carbon that way. The second step is to reduce, that is to consume the energy that you need to and produce the carbon that you have to, but as efficiently as you can. Heating and cooling buildings only when necessary, only to a certain degree to make them as comfortable as necessary, having computers on only when they're being used, that kind of thing. The third step is to replace. And so the first two are really about behavioral changes. The next two are about, well, what can we do beyond that? The replace is to be careful about where you purchase your energy. Purchase from green sources rather than from, say, carbon producing coal and natural gas. Just as a side note, in terms of low carbon energy sources, solar and wind get the most attention these days, but I think we should acknowledge the important contribution of nuclear energy. Incidentally, the largest nuclear power plant in the United States is only 120 miles from here, as the crow flies. The last one is offset. So if you can't turn down your carbon footprint enough through avoiding, reducing, or replacing. The last part is to attempt to buy your way out of that situation. And you can buy carbon offsets. That money can go to increasing green energy production, or you can essentially try to pay someone else not to produce carbon, thereby lowering your collective carbon footprint. That one is a little challenging, I have to admit, because the carbon offset market is virtually unregulated right now. And so there's a bit of buyer beware as to how much bang you get for your buck. And so we will need to be careful about that option if we go that route. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Tom.
Right. And so what can PCC, well, first of all, thanks, Noah. What can PCC do, right? Obviously, we need to, as an organization, look at how we do business differently, right? And so we need to start off with including climate as a factor in our decisions. And just by creating this plan, I think we're on our road to do that, right? But we also have to incorporate it in all the small, from the smallest unit all the way up to the top of the college. So we need to really think about climate as we make decisions on what we're doing, how we're doing it. We need to embed climate awareness, right, and climate neutral, climate positive practices throughout our academic offerings, right. The thing that's really going to have probably the longer lasting effect, not just by us doing something, but really incorporating climate awareness in everything we do when it comes to our academics, right? Because that will then change lives, which then will then go out into the world as they in their lives do things or don't do things, right? And if we impart upon to our students the effects of climate, the effects of greenhouse gases, et cetera, then they can take that into their life and help throughout the course of their lifespan as they implement small practices, and that will make a difference. We need to raise awareness about climate change amongst our employees, learners, community, be a leader in our community, in essence, to talk about this. And we need to address the carbon footprint resulting from all our college operations and try to be, and really become, not even try, but become that carbon neutral institution that we all want to be. Efforts to address PCC's carbon footprint it's going to be system-wide, and it's unlikely that any corner of this college will go untouched, from academics to facilities to when people travel, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be an all-encompassing effort. And it's something that we need to really take seriously, because if we look at the carbon management hierarchy that Noah described, it's the little things that will have the most effect, I think. And so we just need to really kind of look at the whole institution as we do. And good examples of those are improving energy efficiencies in our facilities, as Noah pointed out. We do a lot of things just because our systems are on, right? Whether somebody is in a classroom or not, right? So we need to look at how do we reduce energy usage to having the most efficient systems. Like most organizations our size, we have very inefficient systems. And I know we're looking at that, but this isn't about what we're going to talk about next. It's about really trying to be the best consumer of energy, since energy is probably the most, the thing that we can change the most, then the better it is, all right? We need to ensure that our systems are up to date. We need to ensure that they're efficient, that they talk to each other so they get the most efficient aspect of it, and really look at our facilities and how we run them, et cetera, et cetera. We could be changing the energy sources we use. We could use electric vehicles in our fleet. We could address where the resources are coming from, and even, as I mentioned, reducing travel, right? It's all encompassing. And so over the course of this next 6 months or so, we're going to develop that comprehensive climate plan and address academics and operations to position the carbon to as you, the board members approved already, to half the carbon footprint by 2030. And so how are we going to do that? So we've already created a team to do that. And that's how Noah and Nick and the team has been already kind of formed. And so basically volunteers were invited through on all Pima email, and based on the responses, the planning team was formed. It includes faculty members, staff, administration, key representatives from areas that we know are going to be included, like facilities, academics, IT, and more. There's a couple students on there right now who want to be part of this, and we'll solicit for more as this process gets underway. And we have one community member right now, and as Noah pointed out, we're going to enlist other members of the community from U of A to the mayor's office, and a wide variety of other folks, because ultimately what we want to really try to be is collaborative, transparent, and science-based, right? We're going to look at those processes, and then ultimately the goal is to submit a draft plan to the governing board in May of 2022. And then at that point, more specifics will be outlined in the plan, how we're going to get to our ultimate goal in 2030 to half our carbon footprint. So it's a really kind of a rough outline. Again, as we go down this this path, we're gonna figure it out. I know the members are already looking at other plans that are out there. So we're looking at all aspects, as well as what our peer institutions are doing and the like. So at this point, that's pretty much all I have. And Noah and I will be available for your questions.
There are questions from members of the board. I see one from Ms. Ripley. You are on mute.
Hi, thank you so much, Tom and Noah, for what you're doing, first of all, and for briefing us today. Just a couple things. Yeah, this is great. It's fabulous that we're even doing this. So bravo for that. And second of all, it's a big challenge. Although I think that a lot of colleges are heading this way because we have to. And I love the quote by the UN Secretary General that we're in code red. So on one of the slides, the what can PCC do? One of the things, and it might go without saying, but one thing you might want to say out loud is also what can we do in our curriculum in job creation, workforce development, in creating more sustainable, renewable energy type of jobs, and teaching that in our curriculum. I think that's because that's what we're in the business of doing. So I think do what I do, and as well as do what I say. So I think being the role model, improving our facilities, making all of our employees aware is great, but also I think the next step is really providing curriculum and training other than just teaching students how to install solar panels. Teach them from the ground up, what is solar energy and biodiesel, et cetera. So that's one thing. And I'm sure you're probably already doing that. And the other thing is, you said May was the goal for the plan. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. One thing that we talked about in a previous meeting, it was one of the very beginnings a few months ago. I attended a meeting with the citizens climate folks, and we talked about possibly collaborating with the community and being a community leader and making April Earth Day sort of a goal. Maybe the plan, our strategic plan might not be ready by then, but I would be interested in seeing what we could do. It doesn't have to be hugely large scale, but I think that would be not just something that we could do for the community, but it would be fun and it would be cool, and it's really, getting the word out. We have the real estate and the people, so it kind of would make sense. Thanks.
I totally agree, Board Member Ripley, on all your comments. And then we're also, Noah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're planning to do a kind of a climate teach-in day as well, and that's going to be up in March. But maybe you can expound on that a little bit more, Noah.
There's two things on the table that we're working on right now. One is an Earth Day event, like you mentioned, and a potential what's called a climate teach-in, which is a global event with I forget the number. I think the organization is trying to get 1,000 institutions, colleges, universities, K through 12, all together at roughly the same time and same day with events at each institution. And so we're exploring that is the end of March.
Are there other comments from members of the board? Okay, I would just, my sort of closing comments would be, I think this is terrific. I'm really thrilled that all this work is going on around this climate action plan. I would really challenge us to be even more aggressive in our goal, not just to parody what the city is doing, but even, as Board Member Ripley said, like, we have an opportunity to really lead, not just in job creation, but really in modeling the behavior. And I wonder whether we already have been sort of on the forefront of so many of these things, solar and, energy efficiency in a host of different ways. Is there a way for us to be even more aggressive in the goals? And finally, I just would hope that we would be cognizant of the transference that's occurring as the modality is changing. As students are leaving the classroom and are working from home, that changes energy patterns and how much energy is being used. And we're not collectively using energy in a single place. We're now using it spread out everywhere. So better understanding what the net total of the energy use is based on enrollment and based on students, not just physical plants, I think would be really good to factor into our modeling. So I hope you will take that into consideration because the college itself may be in a very different place by 2030, 2050, and how we are teaching. So let's, again, be aggressive and have strong, bold goals. Chancellor Lambert.
Mr. Chair, I really appreciate what you just said. I think what you're going to see, even though we set that target at 50%, our hope is that we'll exceed that. So I think that's a very important point you make. But also, I think that each board member, each top level leadership, we need to model the way. I think that becomes important because that sets the tone for the rest of the college. So we need to cut back on the use of paper, stop printing things, start using, I use this Remarkable 2 tablet now. I don't even write on paper anymore. So it's things like that I think we can demonstrate from the board on down, our commitment individually and collectively to send that message so I'm hoping each board member would join in that modeling the way approach as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any closing?
I just want to say kind of a public shout out to Nick as well as the rest of the team and Noah for getting this going, and I think it'll have a lasting effect. So again, thank you for all of your efforts.
And Mr. Fay? Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing at the end here. A colleague of mine has gone through, and he's on the climate planning team. I don't remember what it's called, but Al Gore has this organization to train people to be climate educators. And one of the principles that they instill in those trainings is to end with hope. And so I was just going to end with hope and just point out that we have 20 or so people on the climate planning team. And that's because that's about all we thought would be a manageable number to get things done. But there were way more than that volunteered. And so probably at least double. And so the hope there is that there's a lot of inertia, there's a lot of interest in the college in getting this done.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. And I'm hopeful too. And I think this institution really can lead the way. So thank you for all your work. Next, we have 2.2, the Comprehensive Integrated Energy Management Project. Chancellor Lambert.
So building off of the earlier conversation, Mr. Chair, one of the biggest areas of impact that we're going to make is how we address our overall facilities and operation piece. The next presentation really goes to that element of this larger planning effort. So I'm pleased to have the time to present to you an update on the Comprehensive Integrated Energy Management Program. As you know, we had a review done by GLHN, so you're going to hear about that. But it's going to be done in the context of the work that's been leading up to this point in time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. David B. To lead us through this presentation. Dave?
Chairperson Klingo, members of the board, Chancellor Lambert, colleagues, guests, it is my pleasure to sort of kick off this discussion today with on the Comprehensive Integrated Energy Management Program. I'll be doing a little bit of the lead-in effort, but it's really going to be a team effort with a number of professionals who have been working on this program and the project. And so with that, I'm going to pause and do some introductions so that you both know who some of our guests are, who are showing up in the Brady Bunch boxes all around us. We have from GLHN, we have Joyce Kelly and Henry Johnstone, who will be talking about their review of the program. We have from our facilities department, Mike Baker, who's Director of Facilities Operations and Maintenance, and David Clark, who is the Superintendent of Operations for the college. And then we have from Train, Jim Knutson, Director of Integrated Systems, and Bruce Locke, the Senior Project Developer for Comprehensive Solutions. So they'll be available if there are any technical questions. Otherwise, most of it will be done from the other folks. And then also, joining us is Scott Holcomb, who is the attorney from Dickinson Wright, who has been helping the college in the first phase, developing the contract, the first contract that was approved by the board back in June, and then is continuing to help us with the next phase contract. So those are the folks who have joined. If there were some unfamiliar faces, those are who will be helping us out today. With that, I wanted to start and do a little bit of a basic recap of the program, what the objective, what our goals were for the program, the steps we've taken so far, and then talk a little bit about what the benefits of the program are going to be, and then some enhanced information about the needs, why the college, why this is really an attractive program for the college, and then the verification and validation that GLHN did, along with some information about the next steps with the contract. So that's the basic outline of what we're going to be doing. Sort of in summary overview, the vision involved in what we were trying to do was to allow the college to integrate technology to comprehensively manage our energy use, reduce our utility expenses, and then provide students with a state-of-the-art training opportunity in a living lab concept. So basically modernize our facilities, energy management control systems, enable the students to tap in, learn those programs themselves, and then be able to utilize the data both in data analytics and in the HVAC program. So that's sort of what the vision of the program was. When we started talking about it, we recognized that the college did need to solicit external expertise to help us with this program. So we drafted up an RFP. I'll have a timeline in a second that'll sort of walk through the basic timelines of it, but we issued the RFP back in October of 2019. What you see on the screen here is hitting the various topics that we wanted to address. We wanted to make sure that we found the best expert in the area of energy management systems, programs, et cetera, that could help us not only identify what we could do from a facility standpoint to reduce our energy consumption, modernize our systems, improve our maintenance programs, that sort of thing, but also would be available to help us build the living lab and develop a state-of-the-art training opportunity for students so that when they graduate from our program, they can have their pick of jobs in a really appealing, career-oriented field in HVAC technology. Couple of things that are worth pointing out. This was a comprehensive energy management program. There are a lot of components to it because it ranges from assessing our current state to developing and proposing different financing options. I'm going to mention that because when we started this program, we were in the midst of the expenditure limitation challenge, and we were looking for just what opportunities might be out there to finance creatively if those were our options. So if we had not passed Proposition 481, our need to do this program would be a little bit different, and the financing capabilities would be different as well. So we folded that into the RFP. That made it extra complex because we're talking about different ways to look at financing. It's what then turned into the approach where we have guaranteed savings associated with the program, the projects that are recommended, and also where we've had different financing opportunities that we've talked with the board about back in June in particular. So I mentioned the timeline that we issued the RFP back in October of 2019. We based the scope on some internet research, as well as we started with the vision, and then we did some internet research. And I believe we provided the board with the document that is linked here. The Campus is a Living Lab, which is a document that was put out by the American Association of Community Colleges, and basically highlighted what the state-of-the-art ideas or what the current most interesting and up-to-date educational experiences were in terms of integrating the campus experience with the academic program. And you can go Google Campus Living Labs and you'll find Florida State does programs. There are programs all throughout the country now. And they're based on this idea of experiential learning, the things that we're trying to do with our centers of excellence, the experiential learning, getting students hands-on training that is directly the kind of training that they will use when they go and get their jobs after they're finished with our academic programs. We got five submissions to that RFP. 3 finalists came on site to do interviews and discussions. And then a vendor was identified via that RFP committee back in February of 2020. We then we went through contractual negotiations, started those process, and then provided the intent to award to Train back in May of 2020. And then in the middle of that, we were also working, and this is where Scott Holcomb was involved, working on developing and negotiating the contract terms that we took to the board for approval back in June of 2020. That's what kicked off the program. So we got board approval for the program with Train, and that started the first phase where Train went around the college, took a look at where our systems were at, what the issues were that we were dealing with, did estimates of our energy consumption, estimated what the high potential areas were if we did certain projects where it would be reasonable to expect significant energy reductions. Did that. They gave us updates throughout that process. There were 30%, 60%, 90% milestone meetings where they went through with members of the college, talked about the different findings, talked about what the implications were of some of the inefficiencies, some of the dysfunctional control systems that they were seeing, and started doing projections on what the potential estimates are for savings, that they started projecting that there would be some significant savings potential with some of these projects that they were going to propose. At the same time, there were some questions about the RFP process. The college used an external legal attorney who was an expert in Arizona procurement law to review the RFP, how it came together, the decision process, that sort of thing. And identified that the program and the RFP went without concern. In addition to that, that information, as well as additional information, was discussed by the Finance and Audit Committee, and they reaffirmed the Susan Siegel's conclusions from that March review. That was back in May, and that information was also provided to the board. It's also been reviewed externally by 2 other state agencies because concerns have been sent to the Auditor General and the Attorney General's office, and they have indicated that they have no issues and no concerns related to the information provided and what the college has done. So it has been vetted, I can say without hesitation, more than any contract or agreement the college has ever done, to my knowledge, by quite a bit. Again, no findings or concerns have been identified from these external reviews. Moving forward, back in April, we took this program to the board with the more specificity in terms of the recommended projects, because that's one of the things with phase one. We said we're going to contract with Train. They will identify through that, through their assessment of our current systems and equipment. They'll make recommendations, and the board will then be able to review and approve those projects. So after that, what we did is we set aside capital funds based on the recommended projects, and I'm going to highlight those again. I'm going to recap those a little bit later in this presentation. There were projects that totaled about a little more than $13 million with an expected annual utility savings of around $800,000 that went in front of the board. Again, the board had some concerns. They wanted us to have some external review done in terms of the projects. I'll get to that, and that's why GLHN is going to be joining us today, and also why our facilities folks are going to be joining us. The oh, sorry, Board Member Garcia, I didn't see that your hand was up.
Ms. Garcia, you're on mute, unfortunately.
Okay, a couple of things. Number one, to clarify my point of view.
Ms. Garcia, you muted yourself again.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, the governing board approval for June of 2020 was for an energy audit, only an energy audit. You have not clarified.
Ms. Garcia, I'm sorry to interrupt for a second. Mr. Gonzalez, if you could please mute your computer, because you are together. There's a significant amount of feedback.
Can you mute your? Okay, it's fine.
Okay, please go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, first of all, the governing board approval specifically was only for an energy audit. Number two, the section item was the fact that, so I'm a little confused here. Hold on. The energy audit. And then the other part was that the college facilities, Soul Lane, TEP, they all had input, and GLHN as well, that there were deficiencies in what Train was recommending. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details because I just want to state that. So this presentation here isn't complete as far as everything that really happened. And as far as the Auditor General, his concern was that they don't deal with that type of issue because colleges have their own procurement system, and they recommended us that we go to another agency. And that's it.
Dr. B, perhaps you could break these two items down and discuss each of them separately. The first, just to quickly answer the energy audit and the actual approval that the framework that the board approved in June 2020. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that and opine on exactly what we approved and like what the expectation was in terms of the development of this second phase. And two, if you could talk a little bit about the input of various external stakeholders or contractors who have a financial relationship with the college and may lose or gain based on the decision of these, of whether we move forward or
not. Starting with the first part. So when we contracted with Train back with the original contract back in June of 2020, it was the umbrella agreement for this whole comprehensive energy management program. The first phase of it was to conduct this assessment or the audit, the industrial grade audit. And then before any other financial commitment would go forward to the college, there would be a recommendation from that assessment that would come back to the board. And that's what came back to the board in April for discussion. So that's where it kicked off the beginning of the project, the first phase with the audit and assessment. Then they made recommendations of what projects the college could do. That came back to the board. And then there were some concerns that the board had to do verification or additional verification of those projects. Now, to get to the next piece, there were some concerns identified by some folks internally to facilities as well as concerns from external vendors, some of which had relationships with the college prior to this program, and some of which have relationships that might be ongoing. So they do have a potential financial stake in what the college's decision is in terms of this program. There are certain things that some of the external partners may potentially lose business. If Train does more business, they may lose business. There's internal controls or a control system company that we've been using. The solar program that we have, there are different ways that that might impact what that program or what that company may want to do, and what we would recommend doing with having an independent view, being a Train would be an independent view of that particular solar partner. There are different ways where what we're actually looking to do is get a partnership where we're looking for the best solution for the college. And unfortunately, some of these external providers have, I think, weighed in under the premise that they're objective, but I think that that's actually, you can call into question that they actually have a vested interest in what the college's decision is with this going forward. My personal view is it would be great if we could partner with all of these entities in different ways with some of these energy programs going forward, because there's multiple opportunities that will come up. We're just scratching the surface with what we're talking about with the first phase, or what is the next phase here. Did I answer all the questions, Chairperson Klinko?
The question is to Ms. Garcia, whether that provided clarification.
Yes, there was. Well, I was just asking you as the chair to make sure that
So I mean, to me, that reflects what's gone on.
The other piece that I was going to say is that's the other thing to essentially reinforce what we're here for today, and what the facilities folks from our own facilities department and what GLHN are here to do today is to provide additional confidence in this program. So this external review, that's actually the purpose today, is to get some experts to also give you some additional information. They've reviewed, well, the internal folks are going to talk a little bit about their experience and what their needs are and some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And then GLHN is going to get into their review of Train's proposal, what some of their recommendations were going forward, and their overarching assessment of the program. So that's actually what you're talking about is a lot of what we're doing today is going through all of those. And again, building confidence that this program is going to be really advantageous to the college in a number of ways.
Okay, so let's continue. And then, if we could, as the board, if we could just hold, unless it's a clarifying question, if we could just hold sort of the substantive conversation to the end so we can let all the presenters get through the information. But if there's clarifying questions, let's get them answered. Ms. Garcia, do you have another question? Your hand is still, okay.
And again, just to I'll try and I will shoot through some of the materials relatively quickly, because I really do want to have the external folks and the facilities folks have a good amount of time to present. But we did set aside in the budget the capacity to do this project to the tune of $13.2 million. So it's budgeted, but again, we made that commitment to the board. We can't go forward with this project without the board approving these specific projects. So that's where we're here again today. And then lastly, and I already mentioned this, is that we hired an independent engineering firm to review the specifics of the program, to work back and forth with Train to get clarification on some of the recommendations, or if they identified some concerns or deficiencies in what they were seeing, that they got clarification from Train so that we could all go forward with a lot of confidence. Again, this is a really simple slide to sort of say the point. Actually, I thought that the lead in with the climate action presentation earlier also really highlighted kind of what we're trying to do here is right now we have a very energy inefficient college structure. And what we're identifying is that through putting in new control systems and changing out obsolete equipment, putting in new equipment throughout the college, that we stand to reduce our annual energy expenditures significantly. As I said, Train is estimating around $800,000 per year. So the idea of that is, okay, that will save the college significant operational expenses. That gives us the opportunity to enhance that academic program, the Centers of Excellence. It gives us the ability to do better life cycle planning and replacement of our equipment, because what you're going to hear is that we have some extremely antiquated equipment that we're using. And we need to plan a little bit better and do life cycle replacement of that equipment a little bit in a little bit more of a concerted way going forward. And then also with reductions of the amount that we're talking about, it actually frees up money for college to, for the college from a priority standpoint to reallocate those wasted money that's spent wasted on energy bills that we can better use to support the educational needs of the college. This, hopefully the board got a chance to read this. This talks a little bit about building management systems. I don't want to go into it too much in depth, but the idea is that with modern technology, you have the ability to fine tune your energy consumption and your air handling equipment to be more and more efficient. Again, that came up in the presentation earlier on. I think it was the second triangle down. It is really a massive opportunity that the college has, both to use smart technology to increase the data points that we have available, to tie it to our currently existing equipment, to really be able to maintain and run our plants in a modern, efficient way. Again, and the savings estimates are significant. I'm going to talk again. We've shown the board that already. There's a couple of slides later on show you just how impactful that can be with the size institution that we have. But want to reinforce the idea that this is, using smart technology to hone your equipment, to hone modern equipment to be as efficient as possible. And then obviously also to train our students on that same kind of technology so that when they go out, they're not trained on how to just go to a residential air HVAC, an air conditioning unit and just be able to do that they can actually look in a commercial setting and see from a high-tech standpoint how to run these systems, which are really complex and so forth that as you will see in a little bit. You saw this about in the living labs. The idea is that our centers of excellence are here. What we're trying to do is develop the training for tomorrow so that our students can go out, get jobs, get competitive jobs where they have been trained in state-of-the-art technology that is the same thing they will see on the street. And the best way for us to do it for our HVAC and building construction technology is actually open up our own facilities and through this digital data that they can use to identify where our equipment might be inefficient. Picture that students can pull in that data and through sort of a crowdsourcing methodology, you say, hey, why don't you guys identify which piece of equipment seems to be running more than it should be? And think about how that information, that might be a classroom project that shows a student how they can use that going forward to their future jobs, but that the college then benefits from that because it might highlight that we have a piece of equipment that's not running the way that it should be. And that we can then go up and get that assistance and make changes to our own equipment as a result of that. That's the idea of what a campus living lab is. Just pictures of other ideas that we have in terms of our hands-on experiential learning throughout the college and the things that we're implementing in our centers of excellence. This slide really captures, just on a very basic level, this identifies just how inefficient our facilities are right now. The bubbles identify where our different campuses are in terms of the energy use intensity and energy cost index measures. The dotted line here in the middle is what typical median colleges are right now. And then this dotted line down here is what an Energy Star target will be. So the idea is we have all these bubbles that are very high cost per square foot. Implement energy efficient solutions and move those bubbles down. Again, that will then save the college money. That's the whole concept here, is that our bubbles are really high right now. How do we move them into being energy efficient models and utilize that savings more effectively for the college and also reduce the carbon footprint significantly going forward? All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Mike Baker and to David Clark, because one of the things that was identified, and I think that we missed the opportunity earlier on when we talked about some of these projects, when we did those early milestone projects or the reviews with Train, and they were highlighting some of the challenges that they were seeing and some of the opportunities they were seeing, I don't think that we did a good enough job explaining to the board what the current state of our facilities energy management system was. And it has significant deficiencies. And I'm going to ask Mike Baker and David Clark to sort of walk through these next couple of slides and talk a little bit about the challenges they experience on a daily basis. So Mike and David, floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Dave. Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate your time today. And just want to speak a few minutes on how the current system impacts the facilities maintenance on a day-to-day basis. Regarding the 3 control system, INET, Allerton, and Delta, some of the campuses, because of the 3 control system, requires 2 computers to control the HVAC on a daily basis. And this is partially because INET, which is the biggest, which is 60% of all the campuses, that controls all the campuses, is actually on Windows 7. So this creates a situation it may not seem like a big deal, but for the staff switching back and forth from one computer to the next can be cumbersome and can create a lot of issues, a lot of confusion for them, especially if they're new on the job and they haven't been had the proper training on these systems. It's hard enough to get somebody trained on one system, let alone 3 systems, and 3 especially one system that is totally outdated. So, and with that, so now I'll go on and talk about the graphics. The graphic controls are not totally accurate, requiring additional time by staff to investigate and determine on which system the graphics lie or reside. And this is a perfect example of that. So it shows all these question marks on the INET system, which has been migrated over to another system. So this requires the staff to try to figure this out. And on each campus, this can be different. So it requires some investigation. Some of the standalone, which on the top slide on the right, that empty air handler there, that is a standalone unit that doesn't have graphics and we can't control. So due to the lack of communication in our backnet with that air handler, the staff is required to do field adjustments and just requires a lot of time in the field to figure those things out. Part of the issue is the replacement of failing equipment. Due to the age of our controls, we've been purchasing equipment online, either at eBay or anywhere as we can find the parts. The parts are typically reconditioned, used, not really sometimes reliable for our needs, and it's getting more and more difficult to find the parts even online. The last purchase we made was out of Australia, so that kind of is indicative of what we're dealing with. And we are rapidly approaching a time when we will no longer be able to make the repairs because of the lack of availability for parts. Again, outdated systems. We've been working on INET for about 30 years now. And we see a time in the near future when the resources are going to be unavailable to respond to failures. And David will speak more to this, David Clark. So, and then the day-to-day management of issues, the controls and other things. In some cases, staff, either on-call or regular staff, do not have the ability to make even minor adjustments from the field, and they have to travel to a campus that is probably, which is closest to them. And if it may not be their home campus when they're on call, it creates difficulty for them to learn that system before they can actually even respond to a minor temperature adjustment. So this is some of the issues with the 3 system, and this is why we're hoping we can get this updated and resolved here soon. And this also creates a training and quality control issue for us. Developing and maintaining standards are, we of course we want standards and maintaining everything, but it really is hard to do that when we have 3 different systems that we have to deal with. The training, keeping staff trained on the in and outs of multiple systems, again, can be a challenge. Regarding the inefficiencies, a good predictive tool would be a great support for proactive actions to resolve issues before they impact the college community. So this is something that's been in need for quite a few years. So, yeah. So I'll leave that at that. So to end with, what I'd like to end with here is INET is like working on an old computer. It's slow, it's hard to keep running, and difficult to find somebody who can work on it. So again, thank you for your time, and I'll pass it over to Dave.
It looks like we have some questions, Ms. Garcia.
Okay.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about INET? Who provided that system?
It was Schneider. Schneider purchased it from INET probably about 20 years ago, but we originally contracted with INET.
So my other question is, so Advanced Control Systems in 2019 installed some hardware. You guys have some installed web-based software package that ties into all 7 campuses.
Yes.
Okay, so you're telling me that your systems are outdated, and you're telling me that all these buildings have inefficiency and you can't read the information. So
Delta is only a small, sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Delta is only a small percentage of what we have currently of the 3 systems. The majority of the system that controls the campuses is INET, which is 60%, average of 60% throughout all the campuses.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Let me see what else. I had another question. No, that's okay. A couple of more questions that I have. So we have the INET system that you said is 60%, and the Delta is less than that. And then my next question is, on the new buildings, what system have you guys installed?
On the new building, I think it's Delta.
That is correct.
And who picked those and why?
I would say that was picked by the committee or the architect during one of their committee meetings for the planning of that building.
Okay, so now what percentage are we talking about now
No,
with the Delta systems?
The number I gave you for the 60% being INET did include the new building.
Okay, thank you.
So is that it, Ms. Garcia?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just have a few clarifying questions because there was a few things that you said that I was a little alarmed to hear. One, you said that you're still needing to operate Windows 7 to operate some of the systems that we have. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is correct.
Okay, so
yeah, I'll let David speak to that.
So essentially, with the INET 7 system, which was initially a CSI Climate Systems International that was then purchased by Schneider, as Mike had mentioned. And then Schneider basically in 2013 made that system obsolete and stopped manufacturing of the parts. And the following year, they did the last update that was available for software. And this is required that Windows 7 operating systems are utilized. This would be what's considered a thick client operation, which means in order to actually use the system, there is resident software that has to be installed on a computer, a PC, to do that. The problem with this is because it's not designed to upgrade to more current versions of Windows, not just for the usage, but also I would mention for all the concurrent systems, there's also server infrastructure that we have here at the college over in the data center for CSI INET, for Allerton, and for Delta as well. The servers that support INET, those are stuck at a server version of our Windows R12, which is, as the IT folks can tell you, is also in the area of obsolescence, where getting upgrades for those is a problem also. So what has happened is that basically we've had machines that you need to do an install of this software on. And it's a very, very, very convoluted process in that it requires database management, an older version of SQL that's installed. And then there is a retroactive component that is put in. You have to change settings within. It is just about it's about a 45-minute software installation process by itself, and it doesn't always go the first time. So it is very problematic in the aspect of the support software just for operations, where more contemporary systems, those are basically a web access where you don't have to have any type of software on your machine, and you just need access to the web, or even if it's our internal web, to be able to access those. So it makes setup much easier. It makes operation much easier, and we don't have to run obsolete operating systems or software. What we currently have is not what I would consider sustainable in aspect of the hardware, the software, or the operating system to support that.
Okay, so just to clarify, so for the Windows 7 issue, so we're using a system that's 13-year. We're using the only way to do this is to use obsolete 13-year-old software that Microsoft doesn't even provide technical support for any longer. I mean, I just looked it up. I mean, I don't barely remember Microsoft 17. So, I mean, when we sort of look across, because the other thing that you said that I thought was a little concerning was that we're going online to buy replacement parts because these systems they've outlived their system life. And so the parts aren't manufactured. So we're having to go to eBay as an institution to buy replacement parts in cases.
That is correct.
So I mean, when we look at like how much outdated technology, how many of our systems are we having to do that for? I mean, I guess my bottom line is that I'm actually sort of surprised that we've allowed our systems to become this outdated. And maybe you could talk, maybe that's my real question, is one, I'm sort of shocked by how inefficient and how hampered we are by the lack of some of these technologies. But I think the second question is why haven't we been doing system replacements at a more aggressive rate when we knew that this was going on?
David, please.
With regard to your earlier question, Board Chair, that would fall into that 60%. That is the hardware that is still that we have deployed out there.
So 60% obsolescence is both in the hardware and in the software. The whole sort of everything that's different, obsolete in different ways. Just for
well, just as a clarifying point, the software would be considered a single program that's utilized on multiple systems. What it really comes down to is the hardware that we have in place that we need to use the software to access.
Okay.
Does that explain the point?
Yeah, I believe that explains the first question. The second question is, 60% seems like a very high number. So where in our system did a breakdown occur where we weren't doing standard system replacements? I mean, I went on a tour when I first joined the board of the cooling system at the West Campus, and I was certainly, surprised by how antiquated that was.
To answer that, those are kind of, when I was involved primarily in HVAC, those were decisions that were made at kind of above my level. I know when there were opportunities for retrofits, that was implemented. Of course, like what was discussed with advanced manufacturing, when there was new construction, Allerton was the product that was being utilized in the early 2010s. So for example, our G building up at the Northwest Campus, when that was constructed, Allerton was the product that was utilized there. There was also some modifications that were made at the ST building at the downtown campus. Allerton was utilized there, as well as some significant remodels that were done over at Desert Vista, some grant work that happened for the second floor of the Plaza building.
Okay,
That was implemented.
I hate to interrupt, but it looks like Mike Baker has his hand raised, and then I want to go to Ms. Garcia and then Dr. Hay.
Yes.
So, Mr. Baker.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say that it wasn't for lack of trying. Over the years, we've been trying to upgrade the system. We've been kind of piecemealing it, which is obvious at this time. This is why we're where we're at. So I would just like to say, yeah, it's not from lack of trying.
Then, Mr. Baker, where do you think where did the breakdowns occur? Because, you know, over my term on the board, as you know, as issues have arisen and different departments have come forward and made it very clear that there was a need for investment in certain areas, this board has helped prioritize resources. So, I mean, in a way, we're doing that now, but I am just curious.
I would say, and I don't know for sure, I'm just saying, I don't think it got out of our area.
So it didn't really, so just to be clear, so you don't believe that it left really the facilities department, so it was sort of held internally. Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Ms. Garcia.
Well, my question was because I have heard it from other people. Okay, so might call it a rumor. But Mr. Baker, you guys have requested funding in the past. And you're
Correct.
telling me that you're telling the board right now that it never left your department. Are you trying to say that Bill Ward didn't send it forward? Or is what I have heard is that Dr. B never approved the projects?
I can't speak to that. I have no knowledge of where it stops.
But you did request funding, and for how long?
I would say 10 years at least.
For the last 10 years, you've been requesting funding.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your hard work and your dedication.
Dr. Hay?
Yeah, so, you know, Damien, when you and I started on this board, we were working with the chancellor and Dr. B, unfortunately, to cut budgets. And with that descending line that Dave talked about for years. So the fact that we have deferred maintenance on HVAC is not a novel situation for higher education. The unusual fact that we actually have money to replace it right now is a heaven sent. So congratulations to the facilities team for getting this up to the top of the list, and that we do have the resources to do this. Quite frankly, we haven't had the resources before. We're trying to pay faculty and get through COVID. And so now we have the resources. So I think to put any kind of onerous issue on facilities because the college didn't have the money for the last 2 decades to do updates is kind of misplaced.
No, Dr. Hay, that was really not my intention of my questions. I really was looking for clarification on, because, you know, things do bubble up to the surface when we know there's a problem, right? And we've been able to help as a board, help prioritize resources. And, you know, this board approves a capital list every single year. I mean, a giant capital list comes to us, and sometimes we get comments from different departments and different stakeholders advocating or supporting or encouraging certain things. And I've always felt, even when we were having to make tough cuts, that we were always investing as strongly as we could into capital projects through facilities. And so, you know, just to hear about just how sort of rough the situation is now, that was really sort of my question, is how did we get to this sort of tipping point? Because clearly we now have to take action. So Chancellor Lambert, you have your hand raised, and
Yes, I want to just build off of what Dr. Hay is saying. Having worked at a number of colleges, deferred maintenance has been an issue at every place I've ever worked, because most of the resources that our colleges get, we typically try to put as much of that in the classroom as possible. And unfortunately, that shortchanges a lot of areas. So one of the things when I arrived here was, how do we rebalance the pie and look to see what we could do with what we had? But it was in the face of, we get zeroed out by the state of Arizona. And then because of declining enrollment, not just at Pima, but across the country for community colleges, that was another wave of impact. So we had to adjust to that. And then uniquely in the state, the expenditure limit law also impacts certain decision points, et cetera. You get the idea. I think the larger point I want to make is, let's not focus on what went wrong at this point. we now have a solution in front of you. That was the whole point of doing what we're doing, is to bring us to currency, understand what we need to do to bring to currency. And fortunately, we're in a position to do something now. And so I hope the board will support us doing something now.
Ms. Garcia.
I just want to respond a little bit to the chancellor's comments. Yes, deferred maintenance probably was an issue in some cases, but as a board member, this is my opinion, that we were able to hire a chief of staff, okay, but yet we could not afford to do deferred maintenance. That's all I have to say. That's where our priorities are.
Okay, so let's continue the discussion.
So going forward, one of the things, so this going back to the April presentation, and this is just recapturing the April presentation slides of what the proposed projects were that came from the train audit and assessment, what their estimated savings were by type. It included a simple payback, which is not anything that's that useful, other than it just gives you an idea of over the lifespan of that investment, how long would it take if you're saving that much money. The reason I say that is because I've heard a couple of folks make mention of the fact that, well, if you're talking about lighting upgrades and the lighting upgrade has a simple payback of 16 years, what light bulb lasts 16 years? And it's like, right, no one's saying that. So it's a simple payback. The idea, though, is that it has significant reductions in energy consumption going forward. We have to have the light bulbs anyway. The idea is you put new light bulbs in that drain much less energy and you save money over time. That's really what the point is. If you've heard anything about that simple payback, you could just strike that column. It's not that important. But it does show that it shows that there's significant reduction in energy consumption, particularly and even in comparison with the total costs that we're talking about. But all of these proposed projects are replacing currently existing equipment. Equipment that, as you've heard, is either obsolete in most cases, particularly the majority of this project that we're talking about is the HVAC control upgrades, right? And we're talking about absolutely obsolete equipment that needs to be replaced in order for us to save money immediately, but also it's going to give us the ability to diagnose and identify efficiency projects going forward. So it creates opportunities in the future. Again, $13 million, a little bit more than that, to save about $800,000 as of April. This is just an idea of the amount of savings or the consumption that goes on each year that the college consumes. A total of about 7 million kilowatt hours per year, 141,000 therms, et cetera. That's only to give you some context about how significant the reductions are that we're talking about. So in terms of the electrical, Train is suggesting, and they're putting a guarantee in this project, that we can save as much as 28% on our electrical consumption. That's enormous. You talk about the footprint, the carbon footprint that you're talking about from that first presentation that you heard today. This is an opportunity that not only deals with getting rid of obsolete equipment and addressing what is at risk of failure in certain pieces of equipment, but also that it's going to reduce expenses going over time and give us the state-of-the-art equipment that not only will enable us to run more efficiently, but can do diagnostics and identify what equipment may be falling short, et cetera. And again, also then connecting that to the academic program.
Dr. B, could you just clarify what guarantee means and how it's defined?
Well, I'll let Jeff talk a little bit more about that when he gets into the contract.
Okay.
And then we can have a little more discussion about that because I think it fits that section a little bit more. But I want to make sure that we get into the GLHN review next. This slide, and we talked about this back in April, shows just how significant the reduction in our carbon footprint in different ways to look at it, using a calculator that is available on federal websites. We're talking about the potential to reduce 5,000 metric tons of CO2, just in terms of that's on the electrical side. And then if we go forward with some of the water projects, it's a little bit more than that. So we're talking about significant reductions in energy consumption. Okay. One of the things that came up was, again, some concerns about the projects, the recommended projects. Should I pause? I think Board Member Garcia has a question.
Sure, Ms. Garcia. You're muted.
Dr. B, I guess I just have a question as to why the project, what's been the push to prioritize it before the end of the year?
Well, for one, this project is about 2 years old now. When you're talking about when it started versus where we are right now, every month that goes by is a month that we're still running inefficiently. And the college, just to give you an idea of how inefficient our systems are, we ran recently to get an idea, and this is related to projecting into the future. We ran the utilities consumption for the last year when we went through COVID, and our utilities consumption only went down about 10%, despite the fact that we were closed for a good part of that time. Meaning that in some cases we need to run systems. And again, this is not like blaming, this is like the problem we have. We have inefficient systems that in some cases you need to run them to keep them operational. It can create problems if you don't run some of the equipment, that we don't have the ability to parse off certain parts of buildings. That's something that we need to talk about going forward. When we looked at a number of years ago, the idea of reducing our summer scheduling and cutting down the plant usage, the problem is that our plants are set up to run, in many cases, to run almost fully operational. And it's either all off or all on, and not like you can't parse out, well, this building will run so we can close this building over the summer. We don't have the structure built at this point to be able to do that. And that creates the reality that our energy consumption did drop for the COVID. It did not drop as much as you might expect. Anyway, so there's the opportunity cost now that as time goes by, we are wasting money by continuing to operate inefficiently. We have the risk now of equipment failing, which is a big concern. Actually, that's the thing that probably makes me more nervous. And then on top of it, you have cost escalation challenges where we know that some of these equipment that we're talking about, the cost has already escalated. I have a slide that I'm going to talk about that in the future. And so if we keep delaying and we keep saying, well, let's get more information, the reality is the college is wasting a lot of money and it's putting itself at risk going forward.
Dr. B, I understand that. But I guess in my view, it doesn't appear to me that facilities has been a priority for this college. And in addition to that, I would, for my own information, I would like to know if there's any records of the request facilities has made and requesting funds. Because we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Sure. So since that seems to be something that you're interested in talking about, let me go back and I'll put a little bit of context around what you're talking about. So every year the different units provide, they submit capital projects. Those capital projects all get consolidated into the overall capital project that you see. That is not a decision that is made by one person. That is a decision that is made cooperatively by all the different executive people at the college. And while we were, I think this is the most important point, while we were going through the reductions that we went through, facilities was still getting money to update, to deal with deferred maintenance, to deal with life cycle planning for all of their equipment. And it was assured that if any reductions were happening in facilities, that was something facilities could manage. So it's sort of a moot point in a way, because it's like, there were reductions on the facility side. Facilities was never zeroed out. It was never zeroed out for these projects. What I think is the more important element to it, though, is that and I think this speaks to Dr. Hay and Chancellor Lambert's comments about deferred maintenance. One of the challenges that colleges have is that you're managing operations, you're adding new pieces on, and you're making incremental changes as you go. And one of the downsides to that is that if technology changes pretty significantly, soon what you're dealing with is multiple generations of equipment that may not communicate very well. So there's no real need to point fingers. The reality is the college, like many colleges or like many institutions who even have done responsible jobs in terms of deferred maintenance, you still could have this problem. So it's not necessary to do finger pointing. The reality is that we have the need to update and in this case, incrementally is not going to get the job done. Because if we incrementally change things, as we made a change over in this one building and we added this new building over here, and maybe we did a concerted effort to do one other building here, the reality is we still have multiple generations of equipment and we haven't addressed it. This is an opportunity to holistically put in a new system, and then one that is comprehensive, that is consistent, so that, as Mike was talking about with his staff issues, they come in and no matter what campus is their regular campus, they can come onto that campus on call on a weekend, or they can dial in through VPN, get the information on their screen, and they know what they're looking at and they know how to deal with the problem. It's an opportunity. It's not something that we need to go back and rehash the past. And that's not because I'm afraid to, it's because there's not a story back there, and the point is there's an opportunity now to do what we need to do. I think that that's a decent point to transition to GLHN's review. So we hired GLHN. They're a firm that has been working with the college a number of times over the years, including doing an assessment of our utilities infrastructure a number of years ago. They are familiar with the college. We got in touch with them after the concerns were raised about the projects and asked them to take a look at this project. They're experts in commissioning, doing these kinds of projects, reviewing energy savings type programs like the one we're talking about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Henry Johnstone and Joyce Kelly to sort of give their take of what they identified, what they reviewed, and their general conclusions at the end. So Henry or Joyce?
Sure, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members, for the opportunity to give you a little rundown on our work here over the last couple of months. We were engaged to take the report as it stood in April, I think, or maybe it was March version of the report, and basically look at it through the lens of the technical engineering aspects of this thing. Does it make sense? Was it put together in a standard format? Do the assumptions and methodologies kind of meet the typical industry approach to solving these problems? And are the individual aspects of this thing spelled out clear enough to be able to turn it into a contract for a multi-year contract? So GLHN is a multidisciplinary architecture engineering firm. We do design buildings and we do civil engineering work, but specifically relevant to this situation here, we do a lot of energy work for universities. My 30-year experience, most of it has been involved in higher education. I've been involved in projects up and down the Arizona, ASU, U of A, and NAU, University of New Mexico, currently in California and elsewhere. And really what my passion is looking at the energy flows through universities. That's typically the heating, the cooling, and the electric power, and the plants and the HVAC systems, the lighting, the things that drain energy through campuses. So I kind of have that as a background, a lot of experience in other institutions of higher learning, fairly familiar with the typical kinds of challenges that higher ed faces. And some of the conversation here just a minute ago about deferred maintenance is very typical, very easy to ignore short-term, year-by-year, year-over-year problems with HVAC and control systems. Energy flow is kind of an insidious behind the wall kind of a thing. So you have parasitic inefficiencies that you can go decades with, even though you know they're there, want to get them fixed, but that's not the institution's highest priorities. The last speaker, Dr. Hay, noted that it's pretty rare to get an opportunity, to kind of address these problems. And I would say, in my experience, all of the universities in Arizona and New Mexico have undergone ESCO projects very similar to this one you're embarking on here for very similar reasons. In order to take on the challenges of deferred maintenance, this overall contracting methodology is kind of a proven way of getting it done. You got to swallow hard. There's a lot of controversy in the beginning about how it's being put together and whether it's a fair and open process, but ultimately it is a proven process that solves these really nasty problems with complex systems like controls. I have the sort of luxury now at 33 years of career in looking back at projects I did 20 years ago, the beginning of their design life, and saying, that actually works. We did a controls project at ASU that now I look back and say, I'll bet that thing performed a whole lot better than we were arguing about when we first went into it. So I've got hope that this is really a good way to move forward from the experience in doing this elsewhere. The devil, however, is in the details on how one of these deals is set up and structured. And I think it was probably valuable to the college to engage us. Perhaps we should have been engaged earlier, but to get us involved here, to have a second set of eyes on the way the proposal was written, the terms and conditions, the inclusions and the exclusions, all of the little fine scale details that really are going to make this thing a success. So we went through the material that was provided, which is basically the original proposal, worked with Train through a number of kind of additional information requests, worked with David and Mr. Baker and Jeff Sylvan in kind of understanding how the project had gone down, and came up with seven kind of important things we thought needed further clarification. We started in September. That probably had that done in mid-October. Since then, we've had a couple of more meetings, and I think most of these issues have been resolved, with one outstanding issue that we're kind of in process on, and we'll talk about that. But in general, I think what we looked at here and what we're now satisfied with is the methodology, the actual kind of energy engineering that went into estimating what the savings potentials were. We understand that using the Train trace modeling technique. We got a handle on how that was done. It's pretty high level. Part of the reason that part of the reason this was fairly high level is there is currently very little energy information available on the kind of platform that's going to be put in under this project. So if you go back and think about the the statement by the famous thermodynamicist Lord Kelvin, you cannot improve what you do not measure. That's really been the situation at Pima College. There hasn't been a good way of looking at the energy flows, the data, the operation through the campus at any given time. So that makes it a little bit of a challenge to say, what's the best thing to do right now? Well, we got a pretty good intuitive sense of how it works, and we'll do some modeling to justify that. So that solved our fundamental questions on how did you actually come up with these savings. We had some questions on how this virtual learning lab was set up and what the exact scope that Train was offering for that, and that got clarified. We now understand specifically what those are and how those will get integrated into that, the construction of that project. Metering was another question we had. There's very poor metering data available now, just basically the utility meters. And through this process of kind of give and take with Train and PCC, we've decided to add additional energy meters in the utility plants. So we have some additional meters. These will be useful as we go forward and look at the guarantee piece and how we're going to measure, verify that this project is working according to plan. Other things we kind of raised and I think have now resolved was the commissioning effort. The original proposal had Train doing their own systems commissioning, but I think the industry has realized that it really is more valuable for all parties. There's a real benefit in bringing in a third-party independent agency to go through and validate that all of these systems, controls, connections, points, everything is working according to what the contract says it should be doing. Another issue that we raised here, and again, this is kind of based on our experience elsewhere, is as you do a project that is basically touching all of the parts and pieces involved in the air conditioning systems in the campus, you're going to find a lot of little bits that aren't quite right and need to be fixed in order to be able to get your controls to work. So we call that the contingency risk, and I think one of the things that's been added to the project now is funding and a mechanism by which, as found conditions become uncovered and we realize we've got to fix a damper or a linkage, there's a valve that doesn't work, some electrical components need to be replaced, we got a way to get that done in parallel with the installation of the control. So that's kind of the contingency effort. And finally, as I say, the sort of the rubber hits the road in the measurement and verification. That's really related to this guarantee. Train is offering, if the investment is made in this control system, and I should be clear, the investment in the control system is $7 million of the 13 million. The rest is lighting and other aspects of it. But the investment is made in the control system. Train is representing that they will be able to achieve something on the order of a $500,000 annual savings, which from a big picture, that actually, in my experience, seems like the right kind of number. That's plausible, that's viable, that can happen. What needs to happen now is the final contract, the final methodology for determining this measurement, agreeing on how the validation is going to work. That needs to be written in the contract, and probably more importantly, that needs to be carried forward over the next years of as this thing moves forward. There needs to be somebody paying attention to the energy situation and are we achieving the values that Train represented. So yeah, in conclusion, I think I can't say if it's a 28% energy savings in electricity. There just isn't enough specificity in the data to be able to say that. I can say there's a substantial amount of energy that can be saved here, and Train is offering to do this as a guarantee. And if we can write the contract and stick to the contract in such a way that we're tracking it, then I think the risk to the university or to the college is to a large extent mitigated.
Ms. Garcia.
Yes, Mr. Johnstone, thank you for that information. It was very valuable. There's a couple of questions that I have. Have you ever been, and maybe I'm incorrect in stating this, have you ever been retained to fix a proposal after an RFP has been awarded?
Have I ever been retained to fix a proposal? I'm not sure what that question.
Well, this RFP was already done. And
Yes.
So what I'm getting from you is that I may be misunderstanding, is that you had some concerns and either they clarified them or they fixed it.
Yeah. Which
one was it? It was both? I can't hear you. Yeah. I'm sorry, you're muted.
Okay. In many cases here, we asked for clarification and received it. The report as it was originally provided didn't explicitly state things. We asked for them and got them in return. In a couple of cases, we did suggest that there were changes that could be made, including let's add some meters so we have a better shot at knowing what's going on, and the idea that we really need to have a third-party commissioning. That's kind of the standard way this is done. I would fall under the category of something added later wasn't part of the original RFP.
And then my next question is, do you think this is a fair process regarding other bidders that did not receive the same type of help?
I think this process, in my experience, is always generates some controversy early on because of the fact that ultimately a control system, as you put it in, really wants to be one single vendor, one single product line, one single point of responsibility to be able to get it to work. Later, after it's installed, there are definitely all options for other vendors to come in and integrate their stuff into what's there. But ultimately, to get a viable, functioning system out of the box needs to be one entity. And yes, that's always controversial, particularly in a place where there's 3 separate control systems. Potentially, you could have had 3 separate contractors, each demanding that they be the selected one.
Right.
But that's just ultimately not a very viable solution.
And then my
Mr.
next
Chair.
question is, did GLHN estimate the cost of going to Train's new proprietary system? Now, I'm not sure though if it's totally proprietary, so
Yeah.
I need to have that clarified.
Yeah, that's a proprietary is a catch-all word. That's in some cases it probably is. In many cases it probably isn't. And our scope did not involve doing a cost estimate of what is being installed here. We did get a very clear understanding of the parts and pieces, the components, what's included in the proposal, but we certainly did not do our own independent cost estimate of that.
The reason that I question that is because I know that if it's proprietary, you know, there's a licensing, or you know, you have to continue to pay for something, and the software needs to be upgraded, and you got to pay for that too. So to me, it's not just a matter of you're going to do this one-time $7 million project, but there'll be additional costs throughout the cycle.
Yeah.
And so that is why I'm asking that question.
No, that's a valid, good point. We did clarify that the certain aspects of the software subscription are included. We have that identified, what's included, what's not included. There will come a time when there are upgrades. I think that's probably the case with any software the college buys. When Windows 7 turns to Windows 11, that costs you. I mean, that's just the way that industry works.
Okay, and then the other thing is, have you ever been requested to do this type of proposal before, an assessment of this type by other agencies?
We have done for Maricopa Community Colleges last year. We provided an independent review very similar to this one for a ESCO project to redo their domestic water systems on 11 campuses. So it was a very similar setup. An ESCO had come in and offered to do something on the order of $6 million worth of water system improvements with a guaranteed savings. The guarantee had more to do with water quantity than cost, but our scope was to take the time to go through their methodology, look at their proposal, and provide a recommendation to the colleges.
Finally, my last question, I know you're hoping, is do you stand by your commitment of your review that was provided to PCC?
Yes, ma'am, I stand by my work, yes.
Okay.
My commitment, yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
You've been very helpful.
And Ms. Garcia, it looks like Scott Holcomb, the attorney working on the contract for the college, has his hand raised, so he might be able to illuminate us on some of the nuance of the questions about performance.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to make a clarification. I think Mr. Johnstone, when he was talking about the proposal on the RFP, I think it's important to differentiate. The RFP was to get, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the RFP was to get the proposal for doing the initial assessment and then providing a proposal for this is how we, after they do the assessment, the IGA, of what needs to be done. What he was talking about for clarifications and changes was not what Train did in the original response to the RFP, but the IGA. I believe that's correct, isn't that not? So it's not that they were correcting the RFP, it was refining and clarifying and getting changes to the proposal that was made, which is part of the scope of work to be done after the RFP was awarded. So I just want to make that clarification. There was no changes or clarifications or that to what their response to the RFP. What he was talking about is changes or that to the proposal that was generated after the RFP was awarded. And that's the first and really one of the most significant initial parts of the scope of work that they did.
So, and just for clarification, so really your engineering firm serves sort of as an owner's rep to do an independent evaluation and advocate on behalf of the institution because we are their clients to ensure that we're getting the best possible deal. And as part of that, they evaluated the efficacy and realities of the numbers being proposed and what the impacts would be.
Sure.
Okay. So you really served as sort of our owner's rep. I mean, the way you talked about it, you sort of said we a lot, and sort of that was sort of the implication. We are your client, right? So just to be clear. And then I just have one additional question. The topic, and you touched on this and sort of underscored it at the very end, which was this issue around monitoring and tracking. And I really would be curious to know what is our plan around that component of this agreement as an institution. How are we going to ensure that we're monitoring and tracking and making sure that we're meeting our end of the bargain so that we don't end up in, at the end of the year when the calculations are being done and we didn't, keep our thermostats, below 80, that we're, writing a giant check because we weren't consistent with our management. Mr. Sullivan, looks like your hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you all are willing to bear with us for a little bit, I was going to talk about that when we get to the section to talk about kind of the agreement structure and what's next. Okay. So if you're okay waiting a couple minutes, I can do it then, or if you really want to get to it now,
I can wait.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll shoot through this part relatively quick because then we can get into the contract stuff is next. This is the overarching financial element of the project, but it's recast to what I mentioned earlier, where there's been cost escalation. So the original project that was estimated at 13.3 million has cost escalation due to some subcontractor issues and then just inflation of equipment, that sort of thing you've been reading about, to the tune of about $800,000 because of the delays in the project and where we're at now. That gets the updated proposal to 14.16 million. So I want to make sure that as the board considers this item, that there's a couple of different ways that the board can go. They can continue and consider the approval of these projects as initially identified, which would be 14.2 million roughly. Or there's the ability to reduce and take out a couple of projects or a couple of the categories that were identified. One is to take out the transformer scope and the other is to take out the water and plumbing scope. I think that there's a good reason to do those. Those were of the subcategories, the ones that were, I think, least obvious from the facilities, the internal facilities group standpoint. They also were the ones that resulted in sort of the lower level of the savings And it's not to say that we won't want to do those going forward, but I can say that there's some concerns. The transformer is probably not as necessary right now as some of the other projects. And then the plumbing one, we have some internal issues that we want to take a look at. We've been having some water main issues, as in sewer main issues, backups and that sort of thing. And there is some concern that if we update and make the toilets more efficient, that we might exacerbate another more significant infrastructure problem. So I would actually recommend that we can go forward with taking out the transformer scope and the water and plumbing scope. That gets us back down to the original, a little bit lower than what the original cost was of the projects. Again, it doesn't have a huge impact in terms of the savings. It does reduce a little bit what the guaranteed savings will be, but I think is a good solution to cut the cost down and not just have to eat the inflation going forward. And then as Henry was saying, they made a couple of recommendations that I would also ask the board that we have funds in the budget in terms of capacity to do this. These aren't necessarily going to go through Train, so they don't have to be part of the Train contract. In fact, one of them will definitely not be with Train, which is the independent third-party commissioning. The internal staff also like the idea of, with that third-party commissioning agent, having a consultant who we can contact and use after the fact if they have issues with the equipment that they can sort of continue to use as an external expert to help them with this project going forward once the stuff is commissioned and operational. So the added contingency would be $1 million. That's to handle the things that Henry mentioned, like you put the new equipment in and it's not operating properly. So then you go up and you find that an air handler is stuck because of some other need. And then you've got to deal with the air handler. Things that we don't know are problems now, but that we would then have money set aside to address those as we're commissioning and putting this project into place. So again, that would be adding 2 items to the budget, 2 capital items. They wouldn't necessarily go through Train. And we have capacity in the budget to go forward, and we'll include that in the upcoming budget if it's overlapping into the next year. That would be the tune of $1 million for, again, unforeseen equipment needs and changes, repairs, that sort of thing. And then $500,000 for a third-party commissioning review and then ongoing consulting. So I just wanted to say that, showing the college where we are in terms of the reserve. So remember that this is actuals that will be in the annual financial report. So our available reserves that we monitor, that short-term, long-term, and cash available is about $180 million at the end of June. We have a target threshold per board policy that is in the neighborhood of 125 million. That gives us about $55 million of available money to reinvest in infrastructure and capital needs that we've been talking about. If we take out the amount that's allocated for the allied health, and then we take out what we've already allocated in the capital budget, that gets to an available amount of about $18 million. That's for, again, that would be handling contingencies, this kind of thing. And then the other projects that we know are coming that the board has talked about, the downtown campus properties and some things like that. And then with that, I will turn over to Jeff.
Just a quick question on the budget issues. On the $1 million contingency and the point in the 500,000, do you see that all being expended in a single fiscal year, or is that going to be over multiple years?
It's likely going to be over multiple years. Okay. And certainly in terms of fiscal years, no question that will be over this fiscal year. I'll probably start a little bit this fiscal year and then mostly next fiscal year. Okay, so in a way, we could delay it to the next budget. However, I think that with the contingency and having money available and having the confidence to do it, again, this is about ensuring the board that we have confidence in doing this. We can set that money aside now and be able to spend it.
Okay, but it would probably be spent in next fiscal year. So we're just basically
with the
a mini earmark.
Right, the third-party commissioning agent, we're going to have to go out and contract with somebody, so that will take some time. That contract will then come back to the board. So we wouldn't be able to spend money on that until we bring that back, because it's going to be a super board threshold.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so I thought it might be helpful to just kind of run through how this agreement is structured, or the proposed agreement is structured, and kind of next steps, and address the question that the chair asked. So first, just to be clear, when Dr. B was talking about the third party, reserving money for third party commissioning and for additional services to deal with issues that might arise along the way, that's not part of the train contract. In other words, we would use different vendors for that. So they would be hired directly by the college to deal with some of these the commissioning and some of the contingencies that would arrive. So what's in the train agreement? So I'm sorry, Ms. Garcia, do you have a question?
Oh, you're muted.
I'll go ahead and allow you to complete your statement, and then I'll ask my questions.
Okay. And so just so you know for how you want to time that, so I'm going to talk about the overall agreement structure, phase 2 changes, which is the amendment, which is the part we're in now, and phase 3. So you can decide where in there you want to ask a question, or whether you want to wait till the end. Okay, so the original agreement with Train was what I would call an umbrella agreement, and it covered phase 1. So what I mean by the umbrella agreement is it defined and set key terms for the entire scope of work, assuming that the college were to proceed with the entire scope of work. So what it does is it describes what the scope of services that Train would provide. In general terms, it describes the scope of services that Train would provide for each phase. It identifies what are the more specific provisions that have to be part of the agreement for each phase. So phase 1 is that investment grade audit. That's the report that GLHN looked at and provided feedback on. Phase 2 is what's called the Energy Savings Performance Program. That's what we're talking about now. That's the scope of work to upgrade the controls and the equipment at Pima. And phase 3 is the development and integration of centers of excellence, facilities and controls related to building and facilities management, and that living lab that we've been talking about. So other key terms that were defined in that initial agreement related to financing. How is Pima going to pay for this? And what would be the compensation for Train? And as Dr. B was explaining, initially that potentially was really complicated because Pima College, like many public entities, initially thought we might be financing the cost of the initial investment through the savings that were recovered year by year. However, that became a lot simpler because from fortunate circumstances, the college actually has sufficient capital funds to pay for the improvements up front, and we don't have to finance. And that was the option that seemed most attractive to the board. The overarching agreement also defines how the parties interact. What are the roles of the parties? What are responsibilities, and how communication is supposed to flow between the parties? What the insurance requirements are for Train, how we deal with changes to scope of work that might come up along the course of the work, how the parties would terminate the agreement if one or the other party decided to do that. What are the standards of performance and the warranties that Train agrees to provide as part of the work? How do we handle intellectual property questions? And what do we do? How do we resolve disputes? So there are other terms in the initial agreement, but I just wanted to run through. Those are kind of the basic elements that are covered in the current agreement in place today with Train. All right, so Train completed phase 1, which was that investment grade audit. And the next decision point was if Train identified that improvements could be made to the equipment and controls at the college that would result in energy savings equal to or greater than the cost of implementing those improvements, then the parties were supposed to negotiate in good faith to determine what phase 2 would look like. And that's the point we're at now. So what Train has done and what GLHN has looked at is the detailed proposal for the nuts and bolts of the proposed work to realize the energy savings of the college. So for example, there are long schedules that list all the lighting fixtures that are going to be changed. What are the specifications for those lighting fixtures? What does it cost for each of those lighting fixtures? What air handlers are we going to change? How much do each of those cost? What are the specs related to those? What does the control system look like? So there's many pages of schedules that lay out exactly what's this scope of work that Train is going to do with respect to equipment and controls. What's the cost for that? What's the labor included with that? And part of this phase 2 would also be a detailed implementation and completion schedule. This phase of the agreement also includes descriptions of what type of training Train will provide so that college personnel know how to properly monitor, operate, and run the systems that are and equipment that are being installed. A really key provision is what's called the savings measurement and verification plan. And this is getting to the issue that you raised, Mr. Chair. In order for the college to know whether we're getting the benefit we've been promised, there has to be a detailed plan for how we define the operating parameters of the college, right? So what set points do we set for thermostats, right? Because clearly how much energy we use at the college depends. If you set your thermostat at, in the summer at 70 degrees versus 75 degrees, that's a big difference in energy consumption. So part of what this does, is define what are those operating parameters within which Train would then guarantee certain results. What are the utility rates that are being paid? What are the standard weather parameters we expect during that time frame of operation? How do we measure the utility consumption? How do we measure the electricity being used, the gas, the water, et cetera? And how do we verify what those figures are? Then what we're envisioning is that on an annual basis for some period of years, there would be an annual review and reconciliation between the college and Train to look at all of that data and see, was the college operating within the parameters that we had agreed to? Do we agree what the numbers are? And are those numbers within the targets that Train projected? If they're not, then what Train's guaranteeing is they're going to pay the difference between what was promised and what is actually achieved. So one of the things that's kind of unique about this approach to energy management, and it's a common model that's used in other states, and actually there's state statute that creates the framework for this, and our agreement references that statute and follows that idea. And it's to provide exactly this kind of guarantee that if the actual project results don't match up with what has been promised, then the vendor refunds the difference. So we're expecting that that's going to happen on an annual basis for some period of years so that the college can have a high degree of confidence that it's receiving the benefit that it was promised, and if not, the Train makes up the difference. We also expect that this part of the agreement will include a dispute resolution mechanism. So if Train and Pima don't agree on the numbers or the operating parameters, or perhaps what an appropriate adjustment was. So say, for example, that Pima changes the operating conditions. We move the thermostats outside of the range we agreed to, or there's some really unusual weather event or something else that impacts operations, that there's a mechanism so that we can determine what's a fair adjustment to that guarantee. And if we can't come up with a fair adjustment in discussions with Train, that there's a mechanism to resolve that. So we have a mechanism to resolve that so we can get the dispute quickly dealt with and move on to the next year. So those are the kind of details that we're in the process of developing for phase 2, the burden of which mostly falls on Scott Holcomb, but certainly needing support from and input from Pima College, Train, and GLHN. And part of the reason why we have outside counsel is we wanted someone who has experience with these kind of agreements so that we can have confidence that we have a professional working for the college whose job it is to make sure that the language is going to cover these issues so that we can all be comfortable that the college is in the best possible position to get the benefit of the project that Train has guaranteed that it's going to provide. And if not, that we have relatively easy mechanisms to resolve those. So that's kind of the point of where we are now. And that's the language that we're wordsmithing now to get to that level of confidence. I'm going to go to the next slide.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
And then the third phase.
I apologize. I have to go. I have to leave the meeting. I'm actually selecting a new superintendent for the Madison School District this evening, and that process starts at 5. And
okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Holcomb. We appreciate your time.
Right. Thank you. This has been very, very helpful to me as well.
One of Mr. Holcomb's credentials is he's on a school board actually, so it's helpful to have someone who sort of understands from the institutional perspective. In any event, so phase 3 is where we're going to need much greater participation than we've needed so far from the academic program and the workforce people, and that's the phase, the last phase of this agreement, where we will be providing the detailed plan, much like with the equipment and the controls, for the specific technology that's going to be used, what the capabilities are, how we design and approve curriculum that involves training related to HVAC and other building management systems, the scope of the training and support that Train's going to provide to that, and the specific costs associated with that. So so that's what you could expect to see in the phase 3 amendment to the agreement. So the idea is we have this overarching agreement, and essentially we've had 3 subparts, if you will, one for each phase, that lays out in detail what's expected and how we deal with issues if they arise.
Board Member Garcia.
Okay, so I guess I was a little confused in the fact that the curriculum hasn't been developed first, and that we're going forward. We're not going forward yet, but that we're going to try to implement this system. And then my second concern is that everybody, other vendors have said that this is an expensive contract, more so than any other, 30% higher. Okay. And I mean, we have heard Advanced Ceramics say that, I'm not exactly sure on the numbers, but I believe that it was like over 3,000 more than what would have been. I would make a motion, because time is not of the essence, to table this action until the actual contract is attached and is presented at a board meeting where the public are able to comment and perhaps, and I don't know if I don't know how to do this, but anyway.
So just a point of clarification, we are currently in the discussion component. We're not in an action item. So we're really just still discussing the item.
Okay.
Item number 3 is the action item, which is the amendment to the Comprehensive Energy Management Program Agreement with Training. And that's where, if we were to move forward, we would actually vote. So
okay, so help me with that.
So this is still the discussion. So this is like to answer, this entire presentation is to provide try to answer any additional questions that the members of the board have, specifically related to all of the various components of this agreement. And because of the complexity and because of the amount of time that we have spent over the last 2 years engaged in this discussion, it was important, especially because we've had now an independent evaluation done, to hear all of these components and parts and pieces, so that you really understand, everyone really understands the full totality of and implications of what this really does and does not do.
Okay.
So, I think if you wanted to make a motion, that would be during the next item.
Okay.
But this is still questions. So really, if there are any additional questions to Jeff, but specifically questions about the contracting to Jeff, this would be the time. Okay, no more questions for Mr. Sylvan. Is there any additional component of this presentation for us?
I just put up the last slide, which is just a recap of what we've talked about. And then I think we can transition to post-discussion or a post-presentation or whatever. But, there are lots of reasons to do this project. It's been very thoroughly vetted. It has lots of advantages to the college, including the education program, the ability to completely renovate and update our systems that are antiquated. And there's risk to not doing anything. Just again, you can read that part of the slide, and then I'll finish it up and thank everybody for participating in the conversation today. I really appreciate their work that they've put into this. People have put a lot of time into this program and making sure that it works for the college.
And Dr. B, I mean, before we close this component, I just want to thank every single member of the college community who engaged in this, because we know how hard and how much time this has taken from various departments and specialists and experts, and time from everything from legal to our facilities department. We really appreciate the totality of work that has gone in to really assess and evaluate this opportunity. So just thank you to every single person who has been involved in this over the last 2 years. Okay, so if there's no additional questions regarding the substantive component, let's move to item number 3, which is the amendment to the Comprehensive Integrated Energy Management Program agreement with Train USA. And so let's start, Mr. Sylvan, if you could just read the recommendation.
The Chancellor recommends the Governing Board authorize the Chancellor or designee to execute an amendment to the Comprehensive Integrated Energy Management Program with Train US, Inc. for the Energy Savings Performance Plan and the Center of Excellence of Applied Technology with a total agreement value not to exceed 4.2 million. Just for clarification, I'll mention, so that's the higher level budget that Dr. B talked about. He did mention during the presentation that it would be possible to reduce the scope of work somewhat and lower that budget amount.
Okay, and so let's, before we have the discussion, because I do have a clarifying question on that, is there a motion to adopt the recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second? Ms. Ripley, I believe you're trying to say something, but you're muted.
Second.
Okay, second. Okay, now a discussion. So first, I have a clarifying question. So on the 14.2 million, that does not include the additional 1.5 million that was talked about. And so would we need to add that in at this point if we were to say that would be the upper level would be 5.66, that would be the upper level of expenditure, or you really feel confident and comfortable and the direction is really the 4.2 and that you'll reduce those items that may or may not need to be replaced in a different way?
I think, well, the way that I would clarify it is that the 14.2 number would be, we're talking about the agreement with Train in particular. Those other financial components, the other $1.5 million would be spent in a different way. And we can address it with the board later. I just wanted to make sure that we were being transparent, that GLHN made the recommendations. We have the capacity within the budget currently to do it. We will have to set up a contract with that third party for commissioning. But again, we have a little bit of time for that. And then with the other, it's just making sure that we have money set aside to deal with repairs as they might pop up. So it's probably going to be small things here and there, but we're basically assuring that the budget has the capacity to do those projects. So I don't think the board has to do anything specific to act on those 2 items. Just wanted to be really clear that we are addressing those concerns and have the ability to do so.
Okay, that sounds good. So Ms. Garcia, I believe you now had a motion, you had a sort of an alternative motion.
Right. Well, I am still not convinced that, I mean, I agree with the the energy lab. Okay, I think that's a great concept. No questions at all about that. I just believe that there's another way of going about it. It doesn't necessarily have to be with Train. I believe the GLHN also has a monitoring system that could have been used, not GLHN, I'm sorry, Advanced Ceramics, or there may be other companies, I don't know. But I really think that the college, to respect the taxpayers' money, and mine as well, that we should be looking at using the money the most efficiently. We should be getting the best bang for our buck, okay? Now, yeah, my motion was, the other part is that we don't even have all the information on the contract, so why would we approve something at this point in time? I think we need to table it. We need to have more, I need to have more information. I think the public should be involved in it. I was only given, at 6 o'clock, I got the GLHN report, even though I had been asking for it for over 2 weeks. We asked that they cancel this meeting. And of course, you know, the reason it came up was because we didn't feel that we had enough time to figure out the information that was being given. I think the presenters were very good, you know, and Damon, I think you did a great job in trying to mediate this. But I'm just not convinced that we should be voting on this at this time.
Okay, so I do want to respond to a couple of things, but then I'm going to maybe help frame how you can frame
Okay.
a motion. Okay, so first, you know, in regards to canceling the meeting, you know, this energy audit this entire discussion has been going on for 2 years. And the culmination of all of the work is to inform the board collectively of what's going on. I'm not an energy specialist. I'm not. I don't, you know, I mean, there was a number of, you know, when we were talking about some of the integrated software equipment and the singular management system, I mean, it's new to me. So, you know, hearing it collectively as a board is, I think, really important, and having our questions answered in a comprehensive way and hearing from the totality of individuals who are participating in all of the different aspects of this is really key and important. And that's the point of a study session. That's number one. So when you know, the request came through about canceling the meeting, you know, none of this is new. We've been talking about all of this for a very, very long time. And we saw the train proposal, and we brought in, because of concerns specifically that you and Mr. Gonzalez raised, we brought in an independent engineer to evaluate the factual points in the agreement. And that report is not long. I mean, the assessment is very clear. And I think we heard a terrific executive summary this evening. There's not that much to debate at this point. I don't see. That's just I am of that opinion that this has been, you know, we went through an RFP process. Multiple vendors were able to raise questions. There was very significant allegations thrust at the institution that the RFP process wasn't done in an ethical or legal way. We had all of that vetted at tremendous cost to the taxpayer. Even though there was no evidence to the fact, there was allegations of kickbacks and wrongdoing. We investigated that. We didn't see any of that. And we've continued down this path because I truly believe that, one, what we heard tonight is 60% of our systems are past their life cycle. We're having to buy parts on eBay, that we're using software and systems that we don't even work and that nobody supports and that are facing failure. And if we had a catastrophic failure, we would be in a much more expensive bind. That we're going to result in significant net savings to the institution over the life cycle of this agreement. And finally, it's going to help us reduce our carbon footprint, which I think I feel my role in this board, I have an ethical responsibility to help usher energy efficient, environmentally pragmatic decisions for this institution that both balance cost and the, you know, environmental climate realities that we are all facing. So, you know, I want to say that for the record. Now, with your motion, what you would want to say is you want to offer an alternative. You want to offer a motion to table the item. That would be to a regular meeting. That would be your actual motion. So if you want to go ahead and make that motion.
So you're going to have to help me here. Okay, so I make a motion to table voting on this issue for a future meeting where we can have public comments and have it open to everyone, I guess. And
okay, so
go ahead.
So that's the motion. Is there a second for the motion?
I second the motion.
Okay, so now there's a discussion on the motion. Ms. Ripley, you have your hand raised. This is a discussion specifically on tabling, not the underlying motion, which is to approve the agreement.
Okay, so the motion was just made to table the decision to approve the amendment. Is that correct?
Correct. So we have the underlying motion which we've made, and then now there's a motion to table the item. And so now we're going to discuss tabling the item. So if this motion doesn't pass, if the motion fails, then we'll go back to the original motion, which is the amendment.
Okay. Okay, great. So real quickly, I've only been working on this since January when I joined the board. So I just want to do the quick timeline is the RFP was approved and awarded to Train in June of 2020. I'm just looking at the timeline that David B. put out. So Train was down selected, and then I understand there was another meeting where outside counsel came in because they weren't happy with the RFP process. They found nothing wrong with the RFP process. Both Attorney General and the Secretary General's office said they didn't see any problem as well. Based on all of, so I've done a lot of research since January on this, and based on the fact that we've got risk mitigation going on. So, I mean, looking at the notes here, I think that we've got obsolescence, which is number one. Windows 7 for one is one piece of it. But also, I don't know if everyone else understands what's going on with supply chain, but parts are not only obsolete for these systems, even if they were to be found in Australia or New Zealand or Timbuktu, the delay in shipping is enormous. I know this from car parts, and I've got a 2020 Prius. So now we're waiting even further in improving our systems. And the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be to fix failing systems, because the parts are obsolete and because the system is old. Things are starting to fail. They also mentioned the day-to-day management of 3 different systems and the training and the resources being expended. And the fourth thing was the enormity of the inefficiency and waste of energy contributing to our carbon footprint, et cetera, et cetera. So those reasons enough, and the fact that we've done an enormous amount of due diligence in selecting Trane, I don't understand what more we could come up with as far as finding a new vendor. If we start from scratch, it will cost tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars more in totality to recreate another RFP, to go through this process. In the meantime, systems are failing, supplies are harder to get, and we are wasting energy. So for those reasons, I don't know what else the community is going to come up with in terms of discrediting Trane, if that's the intent. I really am a little bit confused about that. Everything that I've heard in all of my due diligence, this is the way to go. This is going to not only improve our systems, save money. The outside entity, GLHN, indicated very clearly that we could save possibly $500,000 to $800,000 a year in energy savings, making up for any of the costs. And we'll also be providing, the win-win is providing training and putting students into the workforce that are trained in state-of-the-art HVAC equipment. We live in Tucson, Arizona. We wait too long. I don't know what's going to happen next summer as far as the heat's concerned and electricity. So for those reasons, again, just trying to do my due diligence. I think that waiting is an irresponsible act and irresponsible to our fiduciary responsibility as board members to keep prolonging and to keep continuing after almost 2 years to try to waylay this project. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Are there any other comments on the motion to table? Okay, so let's vote on the motion to table. So all in favor of tabling the item to the next regular scheduled meeting, signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? No.
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 Okay, the motion fails 3-2 with Mr. Gonzalez and Ms. Garcia dissenting. Now we have the underlying motion, which is approval of the amendment. Is there any additional discussion on the underlying item? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I oppose.
Okay.
I oppose.
Okay. So
Clarification.
yes, Mr. Gonzalez.
What exactly are we doing this? Read it again.
Okay, so now, the motion to table failed in a 3-2 vote, and so now we are voting to approve the recommendation. The Chancellor recommends the governing board authorize the Chancellor or designee to execute an amendment to the Comprehensive Integrated Energy Management Program with Train USA, Inc. for the Energy Savings Performance Plan and the Center of Excellence of Applied Technology with the total agreement of value not to exceed 14.2 million.
Okay.
So are you a yes or a no?
Let me, I'm a no, and let me clarify. I want to share something.
Okay, okay. One quick thing, okay, thank you, Ms. Garcia. If you could just mute your computer. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Gonzalez.
I just want to do a statement, and because of my vote, and I said already no. And I want to direct my remarks today to my constituents, members of the board, and the representatives from GLHN. Con el permiso del pueblo, voy a relatar 1, 2, 3 palabras gracias. With the permission of the community, I want to speak a few words. In the spirit of cooperation, I ask the chair and the other members of the board to allow me to speak without interruption or attempt to limit my remarks on this controversial issue. For clarity, the questions in these remarks are rhetorical and GLHN need not to respond. Is GLHN aware that on June 30th of this year, Mr. William Ward was terminated from his position as Vice Chancellor of Facilities, and on that day he filed a complaint with the college accreditor. In his complaint, he stated, quote, on June 30th, 3rd, I was voiced my concern that the board, Chancellor, Executive Vice Chancellor of Finance, Administration, and College Legal Counsel violated purchasing contract bidding processes, regulation, statutes in order to favor the train company. On June 4th, 2019, I was purposely cut out of the request for proposal process because it was already decided that train would be the vendor of choice. The board and the chancellor are not being transparent in communication and decision-making, thus increasing scrutiny for its action and generating complaints from community members, close quote. On July 7th, HLC informed the college of the complaint and directed the college to respond by August 6th. After reviewing the college's response, the HLC informed the chancellor, quote, upon review of the institution response, the HLC has determined that further evaluation of the institution's compliance with HLC requirements is necessary, end quote. Is GLHN aware that on October 7th, the HLC informed the college that it would conduct a focused visit to further investigate the college compliance with accreditation criteria? The cost of this visit, according to HLC documents, is Mr. Ward's complaint concerning the train contract, which named Mr. Lambert, Mr. B, and Mr. Selvin by title. The chancellor has attempted to spin the LHC correspondence to state that the board is solely at fault. However, Mr. Ward specifically cited Mr. Lambert's involvement in the train contract. These are the facts that cannot be refuted by resorting to a faulty interpretation of the HLC correspondence to this institution. Is GLN aware of the January 6, 2020 email from David Davis, the former energy resource manager, in which he stated, quote, I noticed that all 6 evaluation criteria areas came from page 5 of the train RFP response, close quote. Did the college provide GLHN the email Mr. Davis sent to Mr. Luke Alm of Salon Corporation on May 3rd, 2021? Quote, do you know anything more about the FRP generation than what I learned independently from you that Train wrote it? It was told this by Bryce May, a Train employee, and I believe you heard this from another employee at Train. It sounds like someone here at PCC is saying that they pulled it from some other shelf resource. This doesn't make sense as this does not make sense as the RFP was so specific and so well aligned what Train has been trying to sell before the FRP went out. Do you have anything to add to this? Close quote. And where is Mr. Davis tonight? I asked that he be made available to answer questions on this and other emails he exchanged with PCC employees. I also asked for Mr. Alm to be present to answer questions. Is the GLHN aware that prior to and during the development of the energy management RFP, Pima employees exchanged approximately 190 emails with a representative of Train. The list of college employees includes Mr. Lambert, Mr. B, approximately 80 emails to and from Greg Wilson, Dean of Applied Technology, who was named to lead the committee that was evaluating the energy management RFP proposals. I will now turn to my ethical dilemma concerning the Train contract and your participation in this work with Train to correct problems you identified in this proposal. On October 27th, you submitted a report on the Train contract. My colleague, Ms. Garcia, asked to be provided with a copy of this report mid-November. Ms. Garcia was finally provided a copy of this report December 5th. I never received any answer to my request of your report. Each of us particularly interpretation of what constitutes ethical behavior. Unlike statute, ethics is a personal and in some cases, an institutional matter. GLHN provided the facilities department with a review of the Train contract that was included in the May 2021 report on the Train investment grade audit. Your firm's review was included with the facilities department review. Subsequently, without formal notification to the board, GLHN was contracted to conduct a second review of Train contract. Your firm's October 27 report stated, quote, we do not recommend Pima College move forward with this offer as it is currently proposed. The study should be completed to provide deliverables defined in the CIEMP agreement. Substantial clarification, some rework of assumptions, methodology, and additional information is necessary, along with negotiation of development of fully mutual, acceptable, and specific contract terms, quote, end quote. Subsequent clarifications, rework assumptions, negotiations of mutually acceptable contract terms. Is this how a public institution should conduct its contracting processes? Yesterday at 6:34 p.m., one day before we were asked to authorize an expenditure of $14 million, we received the firm's supposedly final report on the Train contract. Conveniently, of all your firm's concern have been answered. Your firm worked with Train to include subsequent clarifications and rework assumptions in its proposal. This allowed your firm to give this long and tortured process a thumbs up. I have a copy of the Facilities Department May 2021 review. I have observed your firm modify its view on the Train contract. documents you submitted to the college are now in public record. Your firm provided 3 different opinions on the train contract. Working with train, there was a net rework of assumptions that satisfy your firm's concerns. You are free to defend your firm's involvement in this process, and others are free to question it. The argument that the narrow scope of your contract review of train contract absolves you from fully understanding the process which you led to your appearance here may satisfy your ethical standard. However, it does not satisfy mine. And I do question your firm's involvement in this process. The process that brought us to this evening has destroyed the career of this institution's longest serving senior manager who sought to prevent the needless expenditure of public funds. I have personal knowledge that the employee of this institution are afraid of further retaliation because of this contract, and in my opinion, of our senior managers have comprised themselves by refusing to stand up for what is right, as Mr. Bill Ward did. Tonight at this meeting, I ask that the firm formally withdraw your final recommendation, and I'd ask that your firm conduct an ethical review of the FRP process that led to tonight's meeting. Your firm's final report will likely play a role in any consequences.
Excuse me, Mr. Gonzalez, I'm sorry to interrupt,
involving the train.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Mr. Gonzalez, there's a point of clarification from our attorney.
I understand you want to explain your vote, but now you're asking for an action that's not part of the agenda. It's really not appropriate. So if you would confine your remarks to the explanation of your vote, that would be far more appropriate.
Okay, in ending, I anticipate that you consider your role in this controversial, questionable process. Gracias, thank you to everybody. And as mentioned a while ago, we as board members are here to do what is right, but more important, and I say this very strongly, how can we as board members, even though it's been 2 years, how can we make an informed decision? At 6:34 last night, I received the final information. In fact, Ms. Maria Garcia went for the information as well too today, but it's less than 24 hours. And that's one of the main reason I'm voting no.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, I have a clarifying question. Mr. Gonzalez, did you write that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There are a series of statements that are factually incorrect. And, I'm not sure that in explaining votes is an opportunity to correct them, but, there are a whole host of things from why the HLC is coming for a focused visit, specifically to look at actions of board members and the way that they have conducted themselves in relationship to the community and who they represent and the fiduciary responsibility. That's been very, very clear. The engineering firm who was retained, they were given a very specific scope of work and they delivered on that scope of work. Their job was not to assess other components of this agreement that were in-depth and evaluated by attorneys and by other organizations and outside agencies, specifically the RFP. The host of things that are presented, it's a concern that throughout this process, numerous misrepresentations of fact have been made that have created a significant cost to this college and a massive delay in the approval of this. And it is very, very frustrating that many of these things that have been done have been outside of the scope of the standard set policies that the board have created for themselves. Your letter specifically of yesterday asking for the meeting to be canceled was sent to me. You and Ms. Garcia crafted that and is a clear violation of the Arizona open meeting law. You talk about ethical standards, but yet we as a board must hold ourselves to the highest level standard that we've established. And if we don't do that, we're going to be in a host of hot water, not just with our constituents, but with the Higher Learning Commission. We put the entire institution at risk. So, it is concerning that a whole sequence of information is presented, and it is presented in a way that misrepresents the facts and a 2-year process. And I'm going to give Dr. Hay the final word.
Thank you, Chairman Klinko. I just wanted to have an opportunity to explain my vote of support for this motion. We've been discussing and debating this contract, as had been stated, for almost 2 years now. There's no question in my mind that when you have an opportunity to make a major impact to your HVAC system in a positive way and link that to your educational opportunities for your students, you should grab it with both hands and go forward. We've had extensive review of the RFP process, extensive review of the companies involved. We've had external lawyers, external engineers evaluate this entire process from one end to the other. We have 2 disgruntled board members who want to undermine it for reasons I do not understand. But this is an opportunity of a decade, if not 2 decades, to do something really positive for this college. And I think we need to move forward with all due haste.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hay. And with that, the motion passes 3-2 with Board Member Gonzalez and Garcia dissenting. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Have a good holiday.